And as the 1 week of grace given by the National Broadcasting Commission to stations indebted to it expires, there have been renewed calls for a review of the decision, with the latest appeal coming from the Nigerian Labour Congress. But as Arise News correspondent Mary Chinda reports, the Broadcast Commission says there is no going back on its decision to shut down defaulting stations.
By midnight of August 24th, the National Broadcasting Commission, the NBC, says it will enforce a revocation of licenses of about 48 broadcast channels indebted to the Commission. For now, AIT, Ray Power FM, Silverbird TV and Rhythm FM are off the hook as they are said to have paid up.
Most of them have paid, like AIT has paid, Silverbird has paid, and we are not saying that they should come and pay all the money, but something significant, at least half of the money. Once you give us half of the money, we allow it to go on, and then we have a concrete arrangement with you on how and when you are going to pay.
According to the Commission, the 48 other state government and private broadcast channels have owed the NBC for about 10 years to the tune of 2.6 billion naira.
We have stations that owe as much as 500 million. We have stations that owe as much as 400. We have stations, a couple of stations are owing more than 100 million. And then it trickles down the line.
In spite of the numerous calls on the NBC to consider the poor economic situation which has affected broadcast operations, the NBC says the action is not intended to harm any broadcast operator.
There are people who are owing license fees as far back as 2015, which means in the last 7 years, they are not supposed to have been on air. So are you going to continue to allow them to be on air illegally? Because once you don't have a license and you're on air, you're an illegal station.
People have a right to look at it from whatever angle they want to look at it. But what I know is that we here in NBC, we are doing the right thing and we are operating within the laws. We have been communicating with all these licensees for quite a long time. In fact, more than 6, 7, 10 years. And we have been calling them to come and settle their debt. But they turn a very deep ears on our calls.
It denies allegations that its decision is both ill-timed and politically motivated.
We engaged the intervention of Broadcasters Organization of Nigeria, BON. BON came in and then had meeting with us, and they went back and talked to their members, but still there wasn't anything positive coming from these people. It doesn't matter whether it's election time, one has to live up to, his obligation, one has to do what is needful. It doesn't matter whether it's election time or not election time. What we know is that they have to pay their license fee, and once you don't have a license, then you are an illegal broadcaster, and we must shut you down.
We have instructed all our zonal directors, state officers, to ensure they collect the money. If anybody's name was published and he didn't collect it, he has not paid, enforcement will take over.
While some stations have made some financial commitment to pay their debt and renew their licenses, the NBC says it is not backing down on wielding the big stick on defaulting stations. Mary Chinda, Arise News.
Meanwhile, information just reaching Arise News from the National Broadcasting Commission shows that government broadcast stations and some private stations have made substantial payments or completely paid their license renewal fees. All the state-owned broadcast stations include those in Lagos, Yobe, Kwara, Katsina, Osun. Others are Ogun, Kaduna states.
Quite interesting. And let's bring in the Executive Director of the International Press Center, Lanre Arogundade. Thank you so much, Lanre, for joining us tonight on the program. And of course, we've just gotten that confirmation, more like a breaking news, that some of them are paying up. But you know what, Lanre, let's have this conversation. The Guild of Editors and even SERAP, they've actually sued the NBC, even adding the Minister of Information in that lawsuit. But they're saying this fine or even the suspension of these licenses, it's unjustifiable, especially looking at the economy of Nigeria as it stands. But those who they are going to court on their behalf have now, some of them at least, have settled. So let me get your thoughts really about the entire case without really any prejudice to the court.
Well, thank you very much for bringing me to speak on this. The fact that the Nigerian Guild of Editors and SERAP have gone to court should kind of restrain the NBC from going ahead with the threat to shut down the stations from midnight today. That should be the line, because they cannot claim ignorance of the fact that this matter is now in the domain of the courts. And to that extent, one would think that in deference and in line with tradition, they should suspend action by taking notice of the fact that this matter is in court. That is the first step. The second one is also about the fact that the NBC, I listened to your report on the NBC DG talking about the fact that they will go ahead. Now, this is a matter of public interest. And what we are saying really is that when you look at what it means to disseminate information, the role that these stations play, one would expect the NBC to give some time and maybe look at these cases individually and examine their merit. We're not saying that people should not pay licensing fees, but the NBC also knows that there are issues about these licensing fees. The fact that they are too high, the fact that apart from that, broadcast stations are required to pay 2.5% of their turnover. All this could be crippling of the industry. And the position that we have maintained from the press freedom angle is the fact that NBC should not present itself as if it's only interested in revenue collection. It should be interested in the healthiness, in the development and growth of the broadcast sector. So beyond asking them to pay, it's good that some of them are paying. They need to look at all these factors. What is responsible? What can they do to help to improve the fortunes of the broadcast sector? That should be one of the concerns of the regulator in the industry. We see what happens in the banking sector, where the CBN on occasions take measures to ensure that banks do not go under until maybe the situation has become extremely bad. So we're looking at the fundamental issue of what should be the role of the regulator of the broadcast sector. We're also looking at the question of how they are. Yes, it's true that you have the NBC, and then the NBC is empowered to regulate the industry. But it doesn't mean that this power could be exercised arbitrarily. Like, closure is just a maximum, punishment. I think by the time you get to that level,
Lanre, you
must have been seen to have done, everything possible. Yes,
Great.
I can hear you.
Great. So let me ask you, because you said the regulator should not act arbitrarily. However, the NBC had said it was relying on Section 10A of the third schedule of the NBC Act, Cap N11 of the 2004 laws of the Federation of the country. So it did say this is legal, it's not acting arbitrarily. But you talk about time. The first time this conversation came to light was sometime in May. NBC said, they had that conversation in May of this year. However, it cannot continue to stretch. So when you say time, how long is time enough for the broadcast stations?
Well, you see, when we talk of arbitrariness, we're saying that yes, the law could empower you to do certain things, but the law does not say that you must not factor into your processes developments in that industry. The fact that the economy itself is in a very bad state, and it's not just in the broadcast sector, but particularly because broadcasting entails 24/7. Getting information across to the people. So most broadcast stations rely on diesel, for example, and we know what the price of diesel is in the market. Before now, we've made demands around the fact that government should treat inputs to the media, that is the kind of equipment that we use, should be categorized as educational so that they can get waivers on import duties and so on and so forth. There are so many incentives. There are a number of demands that have been put forward. What we are saying is that the NBC should be part of that. Now, you talk of May. We're talking, this is August. For me, it's not that long enough if we're looking at the economic environment in which these media organizations are operating. And the NBC must be seen to have done everything possible to ensure that you have these issues resolved, including the fact that they've also not addressed that question. These fees that these people pay, really, is it really something that they cannot review? Must it be fixed at all times? These are critical questions that we feel that the NBC should look at. And I also know that there have been a lot of interventions at different levels, meetings with the NBC. It's good also for them to look at the public interest in all this and what this closure could mean for a government that is concerned about the issue of employment and so on.
Right.
Now, we're not saying that licensing fees should not be paid, but we're also saying that such fees must be fair to the industry, and where there are breaches, as much as possible, the NBC could look at individual cases, and they might say that in this particular instance, we may need to give more time to this particular broadcast media and so on and so forth. That is the kind of thing they should do rather than
Lanre,
blanket threat of closure.
Lanre, the NBC would argue and say the fact that they are already owing. They need to pay up first of all before we talk about readjusting the fees being paid by broadcast stations, really. But Lanre, at the end of the day, there's this argument that the NBC wielding the big stick is almost tantamount to gagging the media some way or another. I want to put that in one side and also put the fact that the stations, at the time that these licenses were obtained, they knew their obligations to pay this licensing fee. So where do we draw the balance in all of this?
Well, I feel that we need to have a lot of enlightenment when it comes to the frameworks that govern media in Nigeria, especially the broadcast industry, for people to understand that there are obligations that they need to fulfill, and for them to also take proactive measures. I have argued, for example, that we have a situation where these licensing fees and so on seem to be on the high side, which means that players in that sector could come together, they could approach the National Assembly, they could take proactive measures. That would be necessary. And of course, the role that the media plays in the society needs to be factored into all this, because it's not just about businesses, and government recognizes that. Look at the losses that were incurred. It's not just many broadcast organizations have not recovered from the effect of COVID-19, or even newspapers, and we have seen situations where governments, because you look at the role that certain industries play in society. Look at the aviation industry. Why did governments across the world come to the aid of the aviation industry during and in the aftermath of COVID-19? It is because aviation deals with the mass of the people. They move millions of people a day, and it's not just an industry. So for me, we're not saying, and we're not making a case for violation of the law and say that, okay, you should not pay. Yet, like you said, if you are obtaining a broadcast license, there are conditions attached to it, and you must follow, those conditions. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think governments everywhere look at the other side of the equation. If we wield the big stick, what would happen? Millions of jobs, could be lost. So to that extent, there are situations where government, as a matter of deliberate policy, look at some problems and come to the aid of the media. So you could say, for example, that the media is playing a role now in disseminating of information. We're doing a lot of civic education. What stops government from saying that the media needs to be rewarded from that? Thank you very much. All we're just saying is that let's have a holistic approach to this issue.
Holistic approach. Lanre Arogundade, thank you so much. We do hope that reason prevails in this matter as we count down to that deadline for the shutdown of the erring broadcast stations here in Nigeria. Executive Director of the International Press Center there.